welcome again to another More Than Walking video podcast discussion, where we seek to encourage and bring about awareness on a variety of topics through open and honest dialogue. And tonight we're going to be going over gender equality. It's a very, I don't want to say long overdue, but we've made tremendous strides and steps in getting on equal footing with one another. And though we've come very far, we still have a long way to go. So before we dive into tonight's discussion, just want everybody to just kind of briefly introduce yourself, where you're calling from, and if you're stranded on an island, what is the one food that you cannot be on that island without? And, you know, I'll let you have that at first.
It's probably not going to happen, but peanut butter would be great. And introduction-wise, hey, my name is Jonathan Sigworth. I'm a C7 complete quadriplegic since 2006. So I don't know how many years that's been, but it's been a while. And I run More Than Walking, and it's great to see you.
Nice. Just peanut butter, just for the protein, or that's just like your go-to snack?
Oh, I mean, yeah, for the protein, it's delicious. It's a little sweet. You could use it as bait for, capturing animals, whatnot. So it's multi-purpose glue.
I like that. You're very cerebral. Until the ants
cement for putting together a shelter,
until the ants take it out. Nice. How about you, Nikita? Like, what could you not go without if you were stranded on an island?
Hi, everyone. I'm Nikita Rose from Bridgeport, Connecticut, T4 complete. And I think, I don't really know. The one thing, I think I would need more than one thing. It's like, if I have peanut butter, I need bread, right? I don't know. But I guess I would say bananas. I don't know.
Bananas, nice. But you might be able to find bananas on the island.
True, but you never know. I can't climb, so I need it on the ground level, and I don't want it if it's been on the ground too long.
I could dig it. That's cool. How about yourself, Daryl?
Yeah, my name is Daryl Music, and I'm a physical therapist. I've specialized in spinal cord injury rehab for most of my career. And at the moment, in the way I met Jonathan, I'm a program officer for the Craig Nielsen Foundation, and I manage a portfolio called Creating Opportunity and Independence, which funds organizations helping people with spinal cord injury. So that's my background. And the one food, I'm not sure this counts. This might be too much, but I'd say I would need pizza because I can eat it morning, noon, and night if I need to. So I'm going to go with that as my one staple.
You got a particular topping you want on that pizza?
Well, if I get one, it'll be pepperoni. If I get two, probably sausage or mushroom or something like that.
Nice. We just had homemade pizza last night. My wife made like the kids pepperoni and cheese, and then I had like jalapeno, spinach, and onion on mine. So that's an excellent choice. I really dig that one.
Thank you.
Cool. Julia, tell me about your food experience on an island. What would you have to grab?
Can you hear me first of all?
Yep.
Okay. I would have to grab a Boston cream donut.
Like from anywhere, like Dunkin' Donuts, Krispy Kreme, where you getting it from?
Probably Krispy Kreme.
Definitely.
Just one?
Well, like a dozen, I guess a dozen.
Because for 50 cents extra, you can get that into a dozen.
Right, right.
That's how they used to get me. Back in the day in Virginia, I'd be like, yeah, let me just get like half a dozen. They're like, well, for 50 cents more, you can go make it a full dozen. I'm just like, why not? But I'm like, who really eats 12 donuts? It's out of control.
Okay, I'm Sandy. I'm a quadriplegic. I've been paralyzed for the past 6 years, going on 7 now. If I was on a stranded island and the only thing that I could bring with me where I can't live without.
Like one food.
There's so many of them, but I think something that would last forever, I guess, would be mangoes.
All right, so
Mangoes, or they could be sweet, they can be sour. You can eat it with salty, you can eat it with salt. Like sometimes, like if you get like mangoes and you pickle them, they kind of taste meaty. Yeah, so mangoes. I would take mangoes. Mango trees all day.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm Keith Fuller. I'm sort of a retired educator and social worker, and been blessed to know John for over a decade in Middletown. Desert Island, I'd have to say dark chocolate.
Dark chocolate. Nice.
Couldn't do without that. Can't kick it now, actually, but it turns out it's a health food. So
Yeah, I know. I hear it's good for the heart.
Yeah.
Nice. Like, do you have like a particular brand? Are you like a Godiva person?
I'm not a real
eloquent.
I'll just grab some at Aldi's. I like all the different ones.
Nice. Nothing wrong with that at all.
Yeah.
So for me, it's tough being a diabetic, but like if I have no restrictions, I would definitely bring honey buns on the island, frosted or glazed. Really doesn't matter. I'm addicted to those things, and that would be my choice. And also, my name is Corey Feasley. I'm an aspiring hip hop artist here in Connecticut, and I'm also a naval veteran. And I worked in engineering aboard an aircraft carrier from 2001 until 2005 when I got hurt in the diving accident. So that's my background. But again, welcome everybody. Thank you for those introductions. And, we're just going to get into the topic at hand, gender equality. It's a very broad subject, and many people have opinions, thoughts, and feelings and emotions about it. And we just want to kind of navigate through those thoughts and those feelings. We all come from different backgrounds and cultures, and our view on gender equality is going to be different from one another's. And so we just want to get some insight from everybody to see what changes can we make, what challenges can we overcome in ever growing society. So what is equality? Is essentially having the same rights and opportunities as someone of the opposite sex. Susan B. Anthony is quoted as saying, "I am glad above, all else, that the time is coming when all women alike shall have the full rights of citizenship." It seems so far removed from the women's suffrage movement of 1920 that women are still fighting for certain rights that men have always been entitled to. And so in honor of women and the women also on this call, we want to explore that and try to really get an idea of where they're coming from and what they've seen and their viewpoints on it, because oftentimes men have made laws and constructed laws, especially here in our country and all across the world, quite frankly, but we need to get insight from, our counterparts as well. So, as I was doing some research on this topic, I just found like an abundance of information, and to some degree it's changed a lot of my perspective when it comes down to how we assess gender roles and how we view women. And so one of those things comes from just being a parent. And so question one is, equality is about mutual respect. Parenting is a perfect example of this. Mothers do things differently than fathers and vice versa. This balancing act, though chaotic at times, has a profound effect on a child's development. I looked and saw that Pew did a research poll that said that parents are about 70% are concerned about the screen time that children have the availability to have in this day and age. And it's kind of hard not to, because we have tons of screens and tablets and telephones, and many of us didn't grow up with all of these items in a way, but our kids are growing up this way, and parents have a different parenting styles when it comes down to that. I know, though, I and my wife have a general consensus about how we evaluate the amount of time they get on it. We do parent in different ways. And so I'm asking you guys, what skill set have you learned by watching your parents or parent, and how has it helped you thus far? And Nikita, I would love for you to answer that first, if you don't mind.
Growing up in a one-parent household for the majority of my life, that goes from my mom down to my grandmother, has really been a father figure. So the scale has always been tipped in, my eyes in a woman's favor. Not to say that a man's opinion wouldn't matter, because, growing up without a father is disadvantage. So as I got older, it's basically, sort of like not being equal with, your friends who have a two-parent household in a way. So gender equality is important. Not only growing up in a household,
Yes, it was.
but as well as branching out into the community, seeing good role models, but at the same time being considered the equal, not being considered less than. There's already a gap when it comes to money. We don't, society doesn't really look at us as equal when it comes to sports as well. So, there's a struggle all the way around. For me, it's been a struggle. Not too much to say that it has hindered my growth, because it hasn't, because unfortunately I'm not working, so I wouldn't know how hard it is when it comes to the payroll situation. But gender equality, it doesn't seem like it seems like the gap is getting closed just a little bit, but at the same time we still have a long way to go. And kudos to all the women, regardless of race, that are becoming the first at a lot of things. That's a pedestal that a lot of young women are looking at. That's a pedestal that I myself am looking at. And I'm like, if they can do it, even in my age right now, I'm 44, I can still achieve a lot of things. So age for a lot of things is a gender gap too. Because, people think just because you're a certain age, you can't really do certain things. But like they say, you could teach an old dog new tricks. So that comes with age and gender.
So would you say, watching like your grandmother and your mom, that type of resilience has allowed you to be more optimistic as far as your role as a woman in society?
In a way, but at the same time, I could see how they struggled with not having, an opinion from the male point of view when it comes to discipline and so on and so forth.
No, that's dope, because oftentimes in our society from like the 50s and 60s, where you had dual parent households and the number was high, about 80%, to today's day and age, it's about dropped down to 60%, where, both children are being raised in single parent homes. They're also raised with parents who aren't married, and oftentimes, sometimes even with fathers in those situations. Many of those fathers might be solo parenting, or just at odds maybe with their partner, but they don't even have a home of their own, and they sometimes live with their mom. And so those kind of parental examples of that balance that you just talked about, like you can see where they kind of was hurting because you didn't have your father figure in your life And, having to make those tough calls from a female perspective can be difficult without having another point of view. That definitely interesting that you brought that up. Julia, how about just, I know, you're definitely the spitting image of your dad. What are some things that you from both of your parents throughout your life, and how has that helped you thus far?
I think the biggest thing I learned from my parents, they allowed us to play with either gender role. So if we were interested in playing with G.I. Joe or Barbies, that was fine. If I wanted to wear my dad's suit and play, it wasn't a big deal. That was fine. Just being able to be fluid. I have two sisters, so we were all girls. So it was nice that my parents never put those constraints on us. It allowed us to kind of just flow back and forth and what was most comfortable and exciting for us at the time.
So that's nice. So there was, it was fluent. It wasn't like static, as and I talked about this before. Being able to kind of mix it up a little bit gives you a different outlook on life.
Absolutely.
Do you think that has allowed you to have utility as an adult in terms of the way that you look at things? Do you feel like you're able to see it from a masculine in a feminine side too?
I think yes, I do. I think it helped me be able to accept someone who may be struggling with just trying to figure out what gender identity they want to express. I have sympathy for them just because I was allowed to do it myself as a kid. So I can't imagine being oppressed and not being able to do that as an adult. So I just think it gives me sympathy and both empathy for someone who's actually enduring that themselves, like in real time.
That's cool because, life is progressive and it changes. And so, our attitudes change. We don't have to be demeaning of others as we're learning, going through a learning curve ourselves. That's pretty cool. And I like that you said, like, being able to sympathize and empathize, doesn't necessarily mean that you all always agree, but then you can also have the ability to put yourself in that person's position and try to, work out the most viable solution. That's cool.
I have so much to say about gender equality, especially because of the type of times that we're in right now. Sure. Growing up, watching my parents, thank God I still have my parents. I don't know. I want to believe that growing up from 90s, 2000 till now era, I feel like women have made a statement in society. Okay. They want people to see that we can be as efficient and independent as men can be. I think watching both my parents making sure that they played their role. My mom, regardless of, me going back and forth from one parent to another, my dad ended up getting remarried and he's been with his wife since I was like 6 years old. My mom was mostly a single mother, basically, and she's lived a very, single lifestyle. I feel like all of us played their role very well as far as like letting the mom do what the mom does and the dad do what the dad do. Because I also grew up around my grandparents who are super old school and island. Haitian people tend to have, in my dad's side of the family, which is more prominent in my life, my grandfather was the patriarchy, and they made sure that we followed his rules. Because he was a pastor as well, we also followed his leadership. But there was also a dynamic in that relationship between my grandmother and my grandfather where it kind of was like equal a balancing act a little bit, like you said. Even though my grandfather was the patriarchy and he was the leader and what he says kind of went, my grandmother was the breadwinner. Out of all 12, she had 12 kids for my grandfather. She ended up being the one bringing in most of the money into the household. Outside of the church, my grandmother was the breadwinner. And so that kind of like gave me a sense of like everybody has a specific role, regardless of if you're a woman or not. It's just as important. Everybody's role is important. Not only did she bring in the money, she brought the children in. My grandfather, he had to bring in the discipline and the order, and he had to tell everybody what to do, what and when to do it, and how to do it. They always made sure that everybody had a say in what was going on. It wasn't always just my grandfather talking, or it was just my grandmother doing something. It was always like a family affair, which was always good for me because now that I'm a single mother basically, and my son lived with his father, even though like we live in a society where, you know, if you break up, whatever, people put each other on child support and it's unequal, blah, blah, blah. Even though my son didn't grow up in a traditional home where both his mom and dad was there, me and his dad always try to make him know that all of us play a specific role in your life. And it's not just your parents that parent you. It's a whole village. All of us have a say in what's going on in your life. Your grandmother, your grandfather, your cousins, everybody affects you in your life. So you need to know what your role is and what to do in that specific role that you play. You're a son. You don't have that many siblings. So you're going to get a lot of pressure from both your mom and your dad. And I like that. I like the way that my family was able to not make it seem like it's all about the man or all about the woman.
Right. It sounds like, you know, even though like you didn't get to experience that that the mom and dad within the home, you know, mean for the rest of your life, like, you know, beyond 6, but being able to see like the older generation and some of the things that they instilled with one another, you know, that sounds like that kind of trickled down for you because, you know, you said that you raised your son along with his father pretty much like the same way with that understanding.
Yeah, we try to make sure that regardless if both your parents are in the home, because it's very important that both your mom and your dad are in your life, regardless if you guys are able to have a home, basically like, you know, how they put it on TV. All of us have that. We have a specific role to play in each other's lives. And I think that's in a Haitian community, that's what make some of our families thrive the most because we all know what role we play. Your mother, not only does she provide certain, you know, comforts, there's certain types of respect that you have to give to your mom. Same with your dad. No matter if he gives you money, no matter if he takes care of you, because he's your father and because of the values in the Bible, honor your mother and your father, for this is the right thing to do. It doesn't say honor your mother and father because they're good people,
right,
or they're good to you. It just says honor them because that's something good to do. And so I think that is something that I found in my families, is that regardless if people are doing their job as a mom or as a dad, you honor them, you give them respect and you give them love regardless, because that's the right thing to do. And I think that's what's caused me to be able to overcome so many obstacles in my life, because I didn't leave too much responsibility or expectations in my parents' hands or in my father's hands or in my mother's hands, expecting them entitled, having that sense of entitlement, like, oh, you guys owe me this or you guys owe me that, because I knew that they were human and I knew that they were going to be faulted. And because we all had some type of issue going on, like I remember all the gossip going on in families, in my family, because my grandmother had so many kids. All of the kids would gather the kids, the little kids together. And we always be like, oh, your dad did this, or your mom did that, or your cousin. No, we always had certain gossips. Lately, when I think about my family, I think about all of the drama and how we still manage to still be family, regardless of all the drama. Because I think I see other brokenness around us, and I see how our family still manages to function. It's because we embrace our brokenness, regardless if we're able to understand it or not. Because sometimes we want to understand what's going on so bad. We want to know what's wrong. We want to know how to fix it. Well, at least that's how we think.
It's amazing because like you absorbed a lot of that, you know, throughout your life. It sounds like to be able to kind of like compartmentalize. Okay, yeah, there are dramatic sequences going on. However, that does not deter the need for a mother. That does not deter the need for a father. Because some people wind up siding with like, okay, well, you know what? I don't need my dad because I got my mom, and I don't need my mom because I got my dad. And then those type of things cause splinters and fractions. Those feelings of anger and frustration, I think, are some of the things that we have to like try to figure out when it comes down to how we balance. I think both as mother and father. How about yourself, Daryl? Like, what impact has your parents had on you in your career, like especially as like a physical therapist? Like, do you find yourself taking some of what your mom or maybe your dad or you know whichever parent raised you? Do you find that you apply that in your work environment?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I feel like my dad was a teacher and my mom worked for the Forest Service. So things were always a little snug financially, even though they were both working. And my dad always had some kind of side hustle as a teacher. He was always working extra jobs or cutting firewood and selling it. And I think in my career as a physical therapist, I feel like I've always done the same thing, like some kind of a side job of home health patients on the way home or teaching or different ways to try to just go a little bit further. Another thing you said earlier actually about parents, my parents were really, I thought they were pretty consistent, which I think is helpful as far as rules and boundaries and enforcement. I think that was helpful. But you said something earlier about males and females don't always do the same thing or the same way. And I think that's really true that there's more than one right way. I think, you know, you can, males and females are going to definitely handle things differently, but can both be effectively as far as certainly as parenting. So I thought my parents both, while different, were pretty consistent with how they raised my brother and I.
I think that's cool. Like you mentioned consistency. Consistency, I think, is regardless of whatever turmoil that parents may experience amongst each other in raising, you know, whether it's one child or multiple, it's the consistency that matters the most, regardless of a disagreement. I know in my own in raising my stepdad, he is very financially prudent. Like he don't move. Like he calculates things down to the penny. I think he still uses like a calculator and writes things down. And so to this day, like I do a spreadsheet to balance the finances in my house, whereas my mom was a little bit more freer in that regard. And so when I look at myself parenting, I'm like very like, hey, look, I don't want to go below this amount. This is what it is, to balance it. But at the same time, I see the need to be flexible as well. And that's definitely something I pulled both of my parents. How about yourself, Keith? What are some virtues, if you will, some things that your parents or parent that you saw growing up that has helped you to get where you're at?
I am grateful for my parents, and I've been thinking about it because my dad was 94 and passed down in Florida this last July. And I was down there several times. We talked every day for the past 3 years, and he was my best friend in life, and I'm so blessed. And then my mom was more, I take after my mom. She's kind of introverted and intellectual. I mean, my mother was a librarian and a businesswoman. He was like Sean Connery, and everybody loved him. And but we flew together a lot. He taught me how to fly a plane when I was 16, and like he learned, and it was awesome. Gave up my license 20 years ago, but
Wow.
it was so ideal.
The trait that you picked up from your dad, you guys established a bond with each other. You said he was your best friend, and I think those are the subtleties in relationships. Like you said you're very much like your mom, an introvert, which is cool. You know what I mean? Nothing wrong with that. But at the same token, that still didn't hinder your relationship with your father, and to have carried on that type of bond with one another for a myriad years, I think is awesome, because sometimes boys, when they grow up, they butt heads with their dads, and their relationship isn't as strong as it was because the dad may have been too strict or too hard, but it doesn't sound like that was the case in your particular situation. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
John, tell me, what are some of the things that have helped you, especially as an entrepreneur and businessman, like your relationship with your parents? How has that built you up to be where you're at?
Well, entrepreneur, sure, not a businessman, but I think my parents, it really just came down to personality. My dad was the quiet, introvert scientist and professor, and my mom was the extrovert, going out. She would go into a meeting and know everyone's name within 5 minutes, and so growing up, they both had their strengths and weaknesses. I don't think I can narrow it down to like they had this type of personality because my mom was a woman, or my dad was a man. That's why he acted this way. I that's impossible to do. I don't think it mattered. But they were very different, and I learned patience from my dad. I didn't learn machismo from my dad. I didn't learn that tough guy thing, which I really appreciate, because instead I learned to listen and be patient and be understanding and respectful, as a man. And he was very available to his kids. He didn't give a lot of hugs, but that was kind of, he was a nerd more than anything else. But they were both very affectionate. So I think that's just going up from my dad. And from my mom, just the willingness to go out there and talk to anyone, really, and not be afraid to get to know people, and to question the assumptions you make of others, and to invite people into your home to be a part of your life. I think that's something I really got from my mom. So both of them are really influential.
So father's patience, mother's love. Definitely. I like that. So, I'm just going to move on to question 2. So essentially, like, there are several viewpoints in which we kind of go about gender equity. People are very traditional and conservative about it. Others are very progressive and whatnot. And sometimes one can seem old, the other one can seem a bit overreaching. How do we compromise, and can gender equity be achieved exclusively through legislation?
I don't think that the people really need to be governed. Sometimes I think we take the governing part of what politics is supposed to be too much I don't want to say too much to heart, but I feel like society is so dependent on what the government and the law entails that we forget that we can govern ourselves. and we should know what to do for ourselves, what's right and what's wrong. And nobody needs to tell you that, you know, as a woman or as a man in different situations.
I'm not, I'm not sure. Let me tell you, I can tell you from my background as a physical therapist that when I went into school, 90% of my classmates that were accepted into physical therapy school were female. It's a highly dominant female trade or profession. And so, you know, three or four of us, four guys in a class of 30. And so it felt like I was for the first time a minority in the classroom. But and then as I entered the field and on the pay range, interestingly, every place I worked, which was hospital-based salary, there were pay scales that were determined by the experience, and there was no, as far as I could tell, there was no opportunity for differential in pay by gender. So if you came in as a new grad, you started at step one, and if you were 3 years in, you started at step three, and you would progress through step five, and you'd plateau and be miserable. both male and female were equally miserable at the limit. That even supervisors, you know, you supervise, you make 10% more, which was nice, but male and female were about the same. However, where things start to change was when you talk about the supervisor level, because where probably the gender inequality that I did see would be a lot of the females in this highly dominant female world were taking time out of their careers to raise children. So they would step away, maybe just for a few months, but sometimes longer, and they either they stayed home and raised kids, which is super important, or they were just away enough or they needed some flexibility. Yeah, at the supervisor level, you did not see as many females as you did males, which is surprising because they're such a female-dominated profession. So,
right.
I would say, you know, these little interruptions or family choices would get in the way. I don't think there was, that I'm aware of anyway. I don't think there was anything about capability. It was more about capacity or time management that would separate some of the people that would be supervisors and not be supervisors. So.
That's interesting because I read a statistic where women make up 47% of the work field, but yet in terms of being a CEO, they're about 4.8%. So the numbers just don't reflect the amount of people. If half are already working and challenging themselves and performing just as much as their male counterparts, why is it that in those supervisory roles they're different? So would you say that supervisors were taking less time off in order to focus more on their careers?
I again, you broke up a little bit. I think you said are the female workers maybe taking time off to raise family. I do think, as they're doing that, I do think it's either interrupting their desire to be a supervisor, which is supervising is a pain, but it also may be lowering their chances because others may be sort of seen as more stable or passing them up with skills because they're in the workforce more because of there's no family interruption or minimal.
Okay. Do you think that some way legislation can affect that by, I don't know, if we're talking about if the scale is just based off of experience, should to make it more equitable, because a woman has to take more time off to care for her body and raise the child. You know, not only are they raising the child from conception all throughout, but, you know, post giving birth, do you think that that legislation should step in more to allow women to have that type of paid time off without it affecting their experience?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy. I would be happy to see legislation if that would be effective. I'm not sure from the lens I've had. Like my ex-wife was also a physical therapist. We graduated the same time, so we have the same amount of experience. But she took time off to raise children. I would love to have had her be a supervisor because there would have been more money in the family, and she didn't want any part of it. She wanted to work part-time and have the flexibility. That was a choice. It wasn't her. She was fully capable and had all the experience, probably a better PT than I am, but didn't want it. She wanted to work at a level where she had more flexibility than responsibility, if that makes sense. Work. She didn't want as much work responsibility. She wanted more home flexibility and responsibility there.
Yeah, it just sounds like perspectives change when the dynamic overall change. I can understand that.
I have some hope naturally because of what I see in Generation Y and Z, just an acceptance of reality, not super sinlessness or anything like they're holier and better or something, but they're just a understanding that it really is something that must change and will change, and I'm hoping that will happen on the ground, so to speak, or on the front lines as much or more, and maybe keep pace and maybe drag legislation along with it or whatever, because I'm really losing faith in the American political process, that's for sure. The hypocrisy of the entire legislature being bought and paid for by big corporations. And so, until we get term limits, until we get people willing to cut, a willingness to cut private lobbying. There should only be nonprofit lobbying, and as far in my view. So, I was all over the board there, but anyway.
I think I understand your point. You look at it from, in order to, and it's not like a chauvinistic thing, but in order for things to change, you have to change the perspective of a lot of men. Men have been dominant. Whether in the household or in the political spectrum. I mean, you can take a look at any form of photograph 1800, and you can look at the Supreme Court, it's all women. You can look at Congress, it's all white men, and what have you. It's just a male-dominated society, so that as we progress and people find that they do have a voice and that they are able to, express themselves in ways that are articulate, that you can respect, changing that lens and that narrative, which has gone on for very long, is hard to do. And you have to start with people recognizing the truth. And I think that's where the kind of stalemate comes into play, like from a political sense. Everybody's feeding for the power grabs and to maintain their position rather than what's the best way to watch society move forward. And it just does not include this all male dominated institution. It's just not that way. Until we can change the perspective of the old, it'll be difficult to just do it, I think, through legislation alone. How about yourself, John?
Mandating that there are paid leave programs in place is huge, and just finding ways to make it easier with work requirements that allow both parents to take time off, so it's not just the mother who gets to take time off, but the husband can take time off, so the mother can go back to work if she wants, and vice versa. So there's equal opportunity for both parents to make those choices that Daryl was talking about. I think is key, and I mean, Keith is right on about how those of us who are men, and in the majority who are in Congress, or otherwise, it really is our responsibility to educate ourselves and change and learn from the current and past mistakes, because there is huge inequality still.
Yeah, I'm in full agreement. You can't legislate yourself out of everything. And unfortunately, legislation agrees more with people who are pushing for the change to work in favor of them, whether it's mask mandates or not. If you feel like it's infringing upon your rights as a citizen, you feel like legislation is going to do it, because that then becomes the law of the land, and who can tell you how to feel about it. But there has to be some type of middle ground, and I think that then eliminates this idea of, well, women stay at home with the children, and men go to work. Even though I think inherently as men, we are protectors and providers, so we naturally want to fend, for our family. But there's a good Michael Keaton movie that came out in the 80s or so, the 90s, called Mr. Mom, and he had be the one staying at home taking care of the kids and whatnot, so that the roles were reversed. Question 3: gender equality doesn't only involve having the same rights and opportunities as others, but it also revolves around feeling safe. Sexual harassment and assault have plagued women and men in both their relationships at home and at work. Why do you think this happens, and how can we make the environment around us feel safe?
I think this happens because men have seen, public spaces, the night, even public times, as their domain. And I'm thinking about my experience in India. It's gotten to the point where there are separate subway cars on the metro in Delhi for women, because to protect them from the men, so there are nighttime curfews for women to protect them from the men, whereas there need to be nighttime curfews on men. Right? So there's just this attitude that somehow by default men own all public space, all public time, and it's the women who need to be limited to protect them. We see the same thing happening, with going on in Afghanistan, with the Taliban saying, "Oh, women can't go back to school because we haven't figured out how to protect them yet in those environments." Why don't we just keep all the men home from school until we can figure out how to civilize them, make them not a danger to the women? So the Me Too movement, I think, was really, really good. And there really just needs to be zero tolerance, for sexual harassment, but also for there to be space for genuine misunderstandings, for space for people to learn, especially from previous generations, but for that growth to continue happening.
A friend of mine shared this with me. Was they did a study between which women are you more likely to believe were raped, the prototypical woman or the non-desirable women? And so in this study, they found that when people drew what they considered the prototypical woman, she's, blonde hair, fair skin, very attractive, as opposed to a woman who may look less desirable. And many of the women in the prototypical category don't go on to even speak up about their. So even if it's true about maybe their heightened sense of sexuality, it doesn't take away from the fact that they are naturally emotional creatures and desire to connect on that level before they want to connect sexually. And then the women who are the less desirable are the opposite, and they're the ones who report more of the infractions. And just using this gentleman as an example, with President Trump, when one of his accusers came out, his first defense was, "Look at her. Would I sleep with that? Would I touch something like that?" And in her defense, she had to say, "I didn't always look this way." And then she had to show a picture of her beforehand, which is unfair. She shouldn't have to prove her attractiveness in order to justify his impulse to be able to reach out and physically touch somebody. You know, my friend and I were discussing the same question, and she had shared with me that a coworker of hers touched her inappropriately, you know, assaulted her, quite frankly, and he couldn't control himself. She's there casually doing her work, not trying to bring it on at all, but yet his, you know, assertion for male dominance, as Jonathan spoke about earlier, made him think from another standpoint, oh, I just have to have that. And I think that's kind of the issue with the infractions that happen both in the workplace and as well as like even in private relationship. And just even on the of that argument, you know, as we're talking about gender equality and sexual harassment and assault, men receive it too. In fact, in the military, there are more men in the past 10 years been coming out about sexual harassment and assault than I've ever even thought about. In fact, over the past 10 years, it's been about 100,000 men have come out. That's 10,000 here. And the military has been changing these dishonorable or other than honorable discharges into honorable, because a person may not have felt comfortable in their workplace and they may have tried to contact their supervisor and say, look, man, I'm a victim of this too. And it's not being seen at the chain of command. And if a person can't function the way that they need to at work, they can't perform their job properly, what other options are they left with? So, you know, I think in making the environment secure, you know, yes, it's wonderful to rally and talk about it and whatnot. Now we need something more actionable. And so the people who are in leadership positions, it doesn't matter what type of organization you're running, need to be able to say your claim is creditable. And we're not just going to base it off of, well, you look this way, so therefore you are the more desirable, or you're unattractive. I don't know if somebody would even want to approach you. So I think that's one step in that direction to help alleviate. But you know, like Jonathan said, he spoke about, you know, other countries, you know, you're telling little girls you're trying to protect by not sending them to school. No, you're afraid they're going to have minds and they're going to be free thinking. And we, you know, we can't have that because, you know, everybody's an individual. Question 4 is, people with disabilities are marginalized due to their handicap. This dismissal leads to discrimination, violence, and lack of opportunity. Its presence becomes all the more obvious if you're a woman, especially a color. How can we as men or women help each other advocate for all women's rights? I thought this question was interesting, and I learned something new a couple of days ago about a woman named Toni Stone, who I had never heard of up until yesterday. Google did one of their Google Doodle on their search engine, and it was about Toni Stone, the first African-American woman who was able to play major league or professional baseball. I never realized that, like, when these type of things take effect, you hear about like Carter G. Woodson and the Nat Turners or Martin Luther King. But when it comes down to women of color in the strides, outside of like a Madam C.J. Walker, it's different to hear about, women, especially when they're trying to get equal footing in a lot of areas, just being able to play a simple sport. How can we advocate for women's rights on our end?
People really don't like handicapped people. We really don't. Like, society really don't like. Okay, so I remember I went to iFly one time with a whole group of people that are disabled. And one of the able-bodied aides, I heard her talking to another able-bodied person. She was like, can't stand being around too much disabled people because they all get really mean and she said, they'll run over your feet or whatever.
Oh, wow.
And then I tried to pay attention to everybody that was around. And it looked like a lot of the disabled people were miserable. But then I was just early paralyzed. That was one of the first or second events that I had been to be around more disabled people. You know, it's not that we have a chip on our shoulders, but it's so many different obstacles that we have to go through, especially like because lately, the reason why I've been so snippy is because I keep hearing the same question. What happened to you? How'd you get paralyzed? I think that question pisses me off the most now. I just don't want to hear about it anymore. I don't want to talk about it. I feel like every other day I'm telling somebody what happened to me. I'm sick of it. Nothing happened to me no more. I'm doing all the happening now. Like, I don't want to talk about. And then they have the same reaction a lot. Oh my gosh, like, nah, no need to feel bad for me. It's life, whatever. You know, I want to move on from that.
I think we as people with a disability, we want folks to acknowledge something took place. We have to be able to understand the curiosity, but beyond that, we don't want folk to start trying to put even more barriers in place that we have to overcome, like, oh, now they feel like they got to step on eggshells. Now I got to prove and show them that, like, I'm capable.
Or not only that, some people want to go and tell you, oh, you're going to be all right. Like I haven't already been all right. Or, you know, God is going to get you up, or, you know, stuff like that. It's like, oh, like, I don't even know how to respond to it anymore.
As a woman of color, how does it make you feel? As I'm listening to what you're saying, what would you say directly towards men to help make you as a woman feel like you're not being discriminated against, that you still have those same opportunities regardless of your disability?
My understanding for men right now is we're all going through something. It's very confusing, and we both women and men need a revolution right now. And even though women have come a long way to get their place in society, to try to figure out what, you know, their role and their place or whatever, but I think men kind of lost the sense of identity as well, especially Black men. I feel in America, they've been trashed and devalued, and I just feel like there's so much to be done. And I don't feel discriminated against because I don't allow people to put me in that place. And I try to advocate for myself as much as possible. But when I see other people going through it, the rage is real. And thank God I can only do so much in the little bit of space that I do have. So I try to my thing is love chain reactions, you know, just doing one good deed at a time and triggering other people to do the same thing. That's all that we can do basically at this point, because the problems are so piled up. Sometimes as a humanitarian, when you think of all the things that needs to be done or need to be fixed and you don't know where to start, it's like, okay, let's just keep loving on each other. You know what? Keep loving on each other, and that's the most that we can do. Being kind, being awareness like we are right now, talking about shit that matters, and just keep talking about it until people be like, you know what? I don't want to think like that no more. I don't want to be prejudiced to something that I really truly don't understand.
With my work at the college and stuff, there have been some forums and discussions similar to this. And so I like to just try to see my role, which I've been able to do in a lot of my work career, was advocating and educating and just keeping the ball rolling, you know, that we don't let the news and our personal tragedies discourage us from contending for truth. And white men mostly do not know that largely the slave ships were rape yachts. And that's how they recruited, and they did press gangs in Europe to recruit sailors with very low pay and perilous voyage. And men don't want to hear that. White men do not want to hear about it.
So in order to basically help advocate for women's rights, women of color, etc., understanding that there are some really severe atrocities that were committed against and they need to be put to a halt. And the only way to recognize that is if you know this type of mindset and mentality actually derives from, and how it's been carried on. You know, I always say to myself, you know, the 400 years of enslavement is a hard thing to eradicate within a span of 150. You know, you're not even at the halfway point. And until you can get that old guard and those gatekeepers out of the way, that ushers in, you know, something new, because people don't think that way. You know, when we talked about diversity a lot, because that was the topic that we spoke about last video podcast discussion. And things are changing, like in the workplace, where at one point, past the baby boomer generation, it was 70% of people were Caucasian in the work field, and now that's cut down dramatically. You know, you can see it in our commercials. You know, things don't look the same as they did. So, you know, I like what you said about just being able to address those historical atrocities to make make room for the new. Jonathan, what do you think? How can we, and then even just, you know, on the subject of people with disabilities, how can we advocate more for women's rights?
I think the way we go about it is we go out of our way to make sure that people with disabilities, and especially women with disabilities and women in general, have their voices heard. And if they're not present at the table, to get them at the table. It is our responsibility as men to help these things change, because there is that built-in cultural muscle memory that is in our favor. And it's only by us denying that muscle memory and rejecting it actively, pushing against it, that's going to change it.
I agree with that. And you know, with the last question, and I think that, you know, is a good segue about our role as men, like the perspective of advocating for women. Like, you just don't have to limit yourself and say, well, I stood up for you, didn't I? No, it's just like, you know, I recognize where you're coming from, and this is, you know, important to me. So the term gender role is starting to take on a negative meaning. Many people don't want to be associated with stereotypes of what you should be or what occupation best suits you. How important is the distinction of roles to you?
All for, like me growing up, I was a tomboy.
Right.
I mimicked a lot of guys in my life because that's who I personally was inspired by. And then growing up, I had a lot of guy friends. And eventually, thank God, I started being more feminine so that I can attract more guys, because when I used to be so tomboyish, I didn't attract the guys that I wanted, you know? I attracted the more feminine guys, the guys that were more, you know, laid back. When I wanted the testosterone, the you know, the more aggressive guys.
Right.
But because I was so aggressive and so alpha-ish, it was hard for me to attract those kinds of guys because they like the petite feminine women. Yeah. So I think the chemical makeups of everything kind of matters.
I don't think the distinction of roles is that important to me, apart from just the idea of you know, when you're in a family or you're in a relationship or you're in a marriage, you know, that you communicate what the other person needs to be supported, you know, or what the family needs, what you can offer, and discussing, you know, as I mentioned about my parents, you know, to me, they just came down to their personality. You know, how can you work together? And that doesn't need to be based on gender at all, in my opinion.
No, I could dig it. Like, you know, when I was writing this question, I wanted to look up female Boy Scout leaders and male Girl Scout leaders, and just getting people who are from the opposite gender participating in the opposite gender's role, end quote. And what I found was interesting. So a woman, she did a kind of a blog, and I personally feel her reasons for getting involved in them, although noble, I kind of feel like the men in her life possibly weren't as keen, or, you know, the obstacles that were presented to them had to make her step up into that place. So what she wrote was, you know, her ex-husband had he lived in another town. So I can understand the logistics. Don't know how far the towns are apart between where her son's Boy Scout pack is like meeting up with. And then her current husband that she was going to be marrying and whatnot was an outdoors person. Plus, as a mother, I think her natural maternal instinctiveness about protecting her child inside of an institution that had issues with molestation and what have you kicked in. So she became, you know, she would go to the meetings and realize, like, you know, I don't necessarily just have to be helping to do the fundraiser or packing the knapsacks and what have you. I can go camping with them, give them, you know, a perspective as these young men are up and being groomed, and vice versa with the man who was a part of the Girl Scouts troop. He wanted to show his daughter that you can do just as much as you want in this life, just like he wants the same thing for his son. And so the reasoning, you know, at first when I initially looked at it, I felt like, you know, being a person who has been a part of young men's leadership groups and what have you, I find that it is important for young men to have mentorship with other men, because there are some things, as you spoke about earlier, there are some things that men do that women can't, and there are some things that women can do that men can't. Just don't force a person to necessarily say that you are strictly only able to do these things. So it brought in my perspective on, in terms of when we say what roles are, you know, it's just very, very fascinating how deep sometimes like that rabbit hole goes.
I think, again, as time is moving along, the generation, there's less. I mean, I know there's more active husbanding, fathering, and sharing all parental responsibilities going on in generations much younger than myself at this point. And I think that's only a good thing. Women have consistently, over 50 years of psychological research, talked about the biggest complaint is the husband's lack of participation in housework and, you know, repetitive drudgery chores.
Right.
And it's almost like males, even from 30, 35 years ago, didn't, even at my age, when I was younger or whatever, didn't realize that, well, my wife is working. In fact, she's making more money than I am now. But I still expect her to, I mean, just, you know, she cooks and cleans and does housework all weekend. And, you know, so I think that's changing, and that can only have a better effect on children too, where there's a blessing enough to have, you know, two parents in a home.
Well, listen, thank you guys so much for joining us this evening and participating in this discussion. I hope you're
Thank
able
you.
to tune in next month for another More Than Walking podcast discussion. Until then, don't lose hope, be encouraged, and stay aware. Take
Thank
care,
you,
guys.
Corey.
No
Amen.
problem. Take it easy.
Bye, guys.
Have a good night.
Partly.
Yeah.